Good morning, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you. Hopefully this will get you a little bit of an introduction, I think, to some of the things going on in the seminar, and then lots of other speakers are going to follow up on many of these same things. The idea of feed efficiency has been around for a long time. It's converting the things on your left to the things on the right. For a dairy, for beef, it might include something else. But it's just a measure of converting feed nutrients into animal products, whatever they might be. And since feed is the largest component, representing probably 50% of the farm costs, and for heifers, it's probably another 15% of the heifer raising costs. It's the biggest component of raising a heifer. And the fact that I'm a nutritionist by training, so it's the most important thing. Okay, much more important than the reproductive part, I'm sure. And therefore, repeat, it affects farm profitability. But it's also a monitor of nutrient management, and I think that's where our farmers are using it actually more, is looking at the nutrient management aspect of it. So it's kilograms of feed for dry matter intake, and I apologize right now, a couple of my slides have it converted over, so don't get confused on that. I'll try to summarize the points and we'll go on. Once in a while you will see it for energy-corrected milk, and that probably makes more sense for many of your farms because you're looking at slightly higher fat and protein, which obviously costs more calories to get in there. Two obvious ways to improve feed efficiency are increase milk or decrease dry matter intake. And I'm going to keep coming back to those two things kind of, we're in the heifer versus the cow. The heifer is just going to be increased growth rate or decreased dry matter intake. And the bottom line is highly productive cows, those that have good reproductive efficiency, and are being well managed, are going to be more feed efficient by their nature. And in general, as a cow produces more milk, what's happening there is we all know a cow gets feed energy and she uses it for maintenance first and production last. In the heifer, she's using it for growth first, for maintenance first and growth after that. So maintenance is an important part of it, and when she produces more milk, that maintenance cost of the whole diet obviously is going to be smaller. One of the problems that we have with a ruminant, though, and especially in a high-producing dairy cow, as we increase intake, we're changing some of the dynamics of digestion, and so that digestibility as a percent goes down. Now, it's something that we live with in our lactating cows. Our ration balancing programs have taken this into effect. But you have to accept the fact that any ruminant, whether it's a heifer or a cow, as we feed her more, digestibility goes down because rate of passage goes up. So in many respects, it's probably more important to optimize versus maximize intake. However, in a high-producing cow, under most of our constraints, we end up trying to maximize intake. In a pure world, we'd like to optimize it, however. We've got this ruminant tract, which is, somewhat, it can move and it can expand a little bit, but it's somewhat flexible. Or not that flexible. It has a limited space in that rumen. And as we increase the amount of feed going into her so that we can get more energy and protein, etc., we are going to speed up the rate that it's going to move out of there. And you see this dry matter digestibility decrease. It's slightly faster on grain versus forage. So it's another one of those reasons why we like to keep a high forage diet in our lactating cows. Because that small particle size of the grain can escape faster, but we're limited also where we can go there. We've got some pretty decent equations, obviously I'd say very good equations that are built into our ration balancing systems that take this into account. As we take that high producing dairy cow and move her from maintenance, which is which would be 1x here to 2x and 3x, 4x maintenance. We decrease digestibility a little in each case. It might get a little bit less over time, but we're constantly decreasing intake as we move, or digestibility as we move up in intake. Now, that's kind of give you the basis behind it, I hope. There's physiology behind it in terms of the animal, and there's physiology in terms of the forage, which I'll get to next. Calculating feed efficiency is something that many of you probably already do. You're not really directly doing it for feed efficiency, but you're checking dry matter intakes on your cows. High-producing herds have to check dry matter intakes. That's a given anymore. We need to look at accurate ration dry matters, and whether you use a microwave, whether you use something, a high-tech system, or whether you use, probably the most common one in Pennsylvania would be a Koster tester, but something where you can quite often measure your dry matter intake. That's a tough part with zero grazing. I've never done that, but as the dry matter of that changes from today's rain versus yesterday's rain, that would be really tough. With silage diets, we always recommend our farmers trying to keep track of that silage change once a week or twice a week, because even in a clamp silo, as you have, we have bunker silos, they look the same, but that dry matter will slightly change over time, and the sharp dairy farmer is the one that can account for that and keep track of it and move that along so that his forage to concentrate ratios don't change. So the number one thing for you and I that affect feed efficiency is forage. It's the biggest component of your ration, and it's the one that has the most chance of varying from day to day, week to week, month to month. A big silo like this is one of the neat ways that we've used in the past 50 years to minimize some of that variation, because I get it all in at the same day. I have it there. Very often there's quite a bit of uniformity, obviously, in that silo, depending on how it was put in and some of the field management of it. But we can keep things relatively consistent and deal with those small changes from week to week. But we always must remember, even in a silo like this, that it is still probably the most variable component of your diet. Your starch that you're buying doesn't probably change much from week to week. Your protein component, hopefully you have that worked out so it doesn't change much from week to week. And there's a pretty good relationship between dry matter digestibility of the total diet, which is obviously has a major reflection of the forage, and what the feed efficiency is. And it makes pretty much common sense. The more digestible your diet is, the more feed efficient that animal is going to be. This is one of those where it's reversed. So, some other factors that affect feed efficiency. We know concentrates, the way that they're processed, is going to affect feed efficiency. We've learned that over many years in terms of processing the starch component of the diet by whatever means you may want, but to make sure that it's available in that rumen in an efficient manner, which is probably not all at once, but probably not all 12 hours later. And we try to get some good breakdown over time to keep the rumen functioning efficient. Energy density has the same relationship with feed efficiency as does digestibility. The more dense it is, the more feed efficient it's going to be. And again, that holds true for the heifer or the cow. And so maintaining high forage quality in all stages is the bottom line, the number one way that you and I can improve feed efficiency. So we don't necessarily need to look at the feed efficiency as much as the forage quality, and you're going to get the job done on the other end. Now, in terms of the lactating cow, she has a requirement for fiber, but she also has to be able to digest that fiber. If we put it in the rumen, she's got two ways to get it out of there. One is microbial digestion and the other is rumination. She only has so many hours a day to ruminate. Or if we try to get her to ruminate more, we're probably going to reduce dry matter intake because there's so many hours in the day. And there is a point where the NDF content of the diet will give us greater feed efficiency, but it goes right along with forage quality. And by the way, that line may not go up at the end. I disagree with Dr. Lin on that one, who did this work, but it may a bit. In terms of looking at other factors that influence feed efficiency, it's also rumen health and keeping that cow so that she has the fiber in her diet, but that she has the right kind of fiber that she can digest. We can go with a super high concentrate diet and make her much more efficient, but that lactating cow has a requirement for fiber. And a lot of that fits into the whole area of rumen acidosis. And so that's what gets in the whole area of effective fiber. She needs fiber, she needs NDF, but the form of that fiber is going to have an impact on how well her rumen functions and therefore how well digestibility is, which follows for feed efficiency. So it's rumination, cud chewing, saliva production that all fit in to getting that rumen functioning well so she can be feed efficient. And that's where there's a lot of work in the past been done on looking at rumen particle size as it affects that rumen environment and ultimately feed efficiency. Okay, so feeds number one. Number two is some of the things that you just heard before me. Stage of lactation. Early cows are losing body weight. They're also producing higher amounts of milk, obviously, so they end up being more feed efficient. We do have to understand, though, that losing body weight will create, if we're just looking at feed efficiency numbers, it's going to create some numbers that are really kind of artificial. And then to flip that around in late lactation, as they're putting on body weight, they look like they're very feed inefficient because we're only measuring milk. We're not looking at that body weight change, and so it looks like she's not doing a very good job. We do have variation there in the lactation, and this is kind of a standard lactation curve, which I've pulled out of stuff that's probably 30 years old. And I think from a management standpoint, what a lot of our farmers have, we have this issue here in early lactation. She's losing body weight. She's taking that energy and converting it into milk. So if all we measure is feed efficiency, she looks wonderful. And we know that milk production curve and the feed intake curve are not quite matched up together, which gets us in problems with reproduction. But I think what we've understand I've known for many years, but farmers are starting to appreciate is that when I add and subtract body fat on an animal, it is inefficient. I mean, it costs calories to put back fat on a cow, and it costs calories to get it off. It's not an equal, we don't get every calorie that went into that fat back off to put in the milk. There's a loss there in both directions. And so if I were to redo this graph right now, I would not have this drop in body weight to be quite as much. And I see a lot of our feed efficient farms and cows to have a much more uniform body condition throughout the lactation. I think we've learned a lot there in the past. And just to show you this, if I go through some numbers pretty quick, I took some examples from some actual herds, and this is one that Jim Lin had used, of looking at cows in early lactation or late lactation, so 45 versus 265 days in milk. Obviously, your dry matter intakes are going to be different. Fat-corrected milk is very different. And their body condition score changes. One's losing, one's gaining. I can go back into the literature and I can look at the amount of calories and potential milk that I can get or lose from that body condition change and put that back in the equation so I can actually balance those out to have a equal milk adjusted for body condition change. But I still see that that cow in early lactation is more efficient because I've lost calories by putting it on and taking it off in terms of the back fat. Okay, next thing that affects feed efficiency is maintenance requirements, body size, physical activity, all those things. Season, temperature, the common things where she has to adjust her body temperature. Next one, lactation number, and that really accounts for first lactation animals mostly. The amount of growth that they have in the second or third lactation is obviously much smaller and probably you can't find. And then number 5, cow comfort. How well that cow is stressed, what her environment is. Last one that we try to work with nutrition is some diet additions. I put it last because it's definitely the smallest. But there is some reasonable data showing us that there are things that we can do to modify the rumen environment to make digestibility of forages more efficient and more improved. And obviously, at the end of the day, then that improves feed efficiency. Where should feed efficiency values be? This is nothing different than you can find anywhere else, so it's not rocket science. Somewhere between 1.4 to 1.6 in terms of kilograms of milk to kilograms of dry matter intake. First lactation animals are usually going to, make a little more milk, again, because they're losing body condition. First lactation group, sorry. They're growing, saying that wrong. Second lactation group, early lactation, again, they're losing body condition, so it makes their feed efficiency a little higher than what it would be in late lactation. And to end up on the last one, since I'm not a geneticist, but I will fully admit this might be more than 50% of the equation, genetics plays a huge part. And we're learning a whole lot more about that. Not to go through all this, because I think we're going to run short, but there is a genetic correlation to feed efficiency. Now, it's a multitude of genes. It's not a very simple thing, but there are some differences out there. They can select for it, and it's something that as a dairy farmer, you're going to be able to utilize what they're able to do in genetic selection a whole lot more in the future, and the rate that's happening is just skyrocketing compared to what it has been since World War II. I think that the challenge for us as nutritionists is going to be keeping up with what the genetics can offer us in the future. And this is just a couple simple things to make it very simplified what they can do in terms of genetic selection. You've got intake here, you've got milk here. This cow here is eating a whole lot. She's making the same amount of milk as this cow. Obviously, number 2 is much more efficient than number 1. Number 3 has milk production down here, but number 4 at the same intake is obviously more efficient. And that's really the end result of what we're doing with all this, and for whatever reasons. What the geneticists are able to do, though, is look at the residual feed intake, because they get a parameter of where intake for milk should be, and they have an animal that's above that line, and she has a positive relative feed intake, residual feed intake, and so she's inefficient. And this cow down here, despite the fact that she's making less milk, well, all 3 of these are genetically more efficient. And so that's how they're able to take some of the records I've simplified it quite a bit, but and take it so they can do some selection for those animals that are more efficient. Okay, income over feed cost and feed efficiency, that's where we look at feed efficiency a whole lot more, and we're reducing manure production. Days in milk will have an effect on that. What I've got here is a real farm example where I've got 2 groups of cows, one 260 days in milk and one right around 200, 195. I put their feed efficiencies in as the same, and in fact, they were quite a bit in this, but milk kilograms per cow per day is obviously different in two different stages of lactation. Put in the price of milk. Don't worry about that. It's for comparison's sake. Obviously, the group making more milk is getting more milk income. They're eating more, and I put feed cost per day in, but the end result is my income over feed cost is always going to be more on the high-producing cow and the cow in early lactation. So that's another way that we effectively look at feed efficiency, even though this particular farmer didn't really care about feed efficiency. He was caring about income over feed cost. And you can do the same thing here in terms of just reducing dry matter intake, which is, as I said, the second way that I can affect feed efficiency. And this was a situation where the cows were all consuming about the same amount of dry matter and averaging a similar milk. But if I can alter that diet and change feed efficiency, I can significantly affect income over feed cost, which is where with the parameter that we look at a whole lot. And then some of one of those same herds that we did, we're reducing dry matter intake because we're getting better forage quality and a better combination of feeds so that she's becoming more feed efficient. Well, when I feed her less and her digestibility is better, what happens at the other end of the cow? She produces less manure. And so that's, again, another way. In my part of the world, manure production is a problem on a farm, and I know it is in lots of other places. So if I can make my diet so that I'm producing less of it, that's going to be a significant impact on my farm, even though I didn't really measure feed efficiency. It's just the end result. So making improvements in feed efficiency is almost always going to be profitable, whether it's profitable from an income over feed cost or manure production ability. They're both going to work. Forage quality is number one. That hasn't changed in the last 100 years for a dairy farmer. Minimizing body condition fluctuations is probably number two. Getting first lactation animals so that they're large enough so more of that diet energy goes from maintenance to milk, and it doesn't have to go maintenance, growth, and then milk in those animals, even though obviously they'll grow some. And I put genetics last, even though I will admit that genetics probably isn't last on some of this in terms of some of the impacts we can have down the road. Okay, so this leaves me about 12 minutes to do heifers. But they're similar. It's the same principles in a heifer. When I'm looking, I've got, feed is the biggest component to the cost of raising heifers. For many of you, heifers are the second component to the cost of producing milk. So keeping them feed efficient is also going to make you money. If you look at feed, it's by far the biggest component of the cost of heifers. So if I can make that more efficient, I'm going to save money. But here's a list of things that will affect feed efficiency in a heifer. Almost the same, although this time I did start off with genetics because I'm thinking chronologically she has to be bred and be born, and she's a calf to start off with. The growth rate is going to affect it. Body composition, same. Fat is inefficient. Gestation will affect it. All the stresses there in terms of heat, cold, exercise. But forage quality, same as a cow, and feeding level, same as a cow. And just typical feed efficiency values, and not to, again, this is nothing rocket science, it's stuff that's published. When a calf is on milk, they're really efficient because I've got highly digestible proteins and energies there. Wean calves, as I start going from a heavy concentrate diet to a more forage diet, as you look at these numbers, they keep changing. It takes more kilos of feed to get a kilo of heifer. And that's because I'm going from concentrate to forage primarily. You get older heifers, you have an 8-to-1, a 10-to-1, a 12-to-1. Some of you guys that feed bedding to your heifers, you're probably going to have a 15-to-1. But there definitely is an effect there in terms of forage quality. Animal growth, it just gets back to this is the most efficient time period in a heifer's life from birth to puberty. She's putting on protein and minerals and bone. She's not putting on fat. At puberty, she starts laying down more fat, and lo and behold, she becomes less feed efficient, plus the fact that she's a larger animal now, and she's got more of a maintenance just to carry that animal around. We've got some neat things that I'm not going to cover here, but that we can use compensatory growth, where an animal can be underweight and we increase the nutrient density, concentrates, and I can make her extremely feed efficiency, because the bottom line is this is genetics and she would like to get back to genetics, and it works both ways. And we look at keeping track of the growth of that heifer, so we go from her genetic birth weight to where she genetically should be and management-wise be in terms of the week after calving, and we can have this growth curve. And the animals that are within the normal parameters in terms of being close to their growth curve are going to be more efficient than the animals that aren't, because I'm either going to lose now or I'm going to lose later on when I start having animals either over or under where they should be. We know the energy requirements of that animal quite well, and they're all based off of body weight, whether it's maintenance, whether it's gain, but those are the two big parts that we're looking at in terms of the energy requirements of that animal, and body weight is the key component in there. Condition scoring, all I'm going to say is fat heifers don't make money, but the fatter she is, the more calories it takes to have gotten that fat and all that extra weight she's carrying around. Decreases in feed efficiency. Obviously, the last third of lactation, she is becoming less feed efficient herself, but that's because she's putting those nutrients into a fetus. Heat and cold stress, exercise, the same kind of things that affect a lactating cow are going to affect the heifer. And I use this chart a lot. Many of the things that you do wrong, that you guys don't do it wrong, but the people that aren't here do it wrong, in raising their heifers cost energy, which reduces feed efficiency and effectively does cost you money. The only one that actually changes if you put them in a well-managed barn, you can actually take the book values tables and they're overfeeding your animal, because you've reduced the maintenance cost when they only have to go from here to here to get feed and water and down here to get to resting place. Her maintenance energy requirements are very low. Then we've got the same issue with the rumen. We've got a relatively rumen that can only handle so much. It can increase and decrease a little in size, but not much. We're making organic acids there. We're doing the same thing as a cow. But we have the effect with a heifer is her nutrient requirements, because she doesn't have that nasty sink called a mammary gland that's pulling off all those nutrients. And so she can produce a whole lot more in her rumen relative to what her requirements are as a whole animal. And the interesting thing is, if we decrease intake, just like in any other, just like in a ruminant, what we do is we increase rumen retention time, and if we have digestible feed, we give the rumen bacteria and or the cud chewing more hours to do it in the course of a day. So we actually can change the rate of passage out of the rumen that way. And just like with the data, I've got it presented a bit different than we have with a lactating cow. We know when we go from maintenance to 2x maintenance and a little higher, that we decrease digestibility because we increase rate of passage out of the rumen. And same with a cow, it's going to affect protein, dry matter, organic matter going in there. Now, another little component that we have with the heifer, in a growing ruminant, it's a lot of the calories going towards maintenance. In fact, about 40% go to feed the gut. And just all the things involved in moving feed and digesting feed from one end to the other cost calories. It's the largest component of the maintenance requirement of a growing heifer, or growing ruminant in general. And it's kind of interesting that the GI tract, if I put them in a high intake, the calories, this is looking at organ mass as a percent of body weight, and there's a direct relationship to the organ mass and the maintenance calorie requirement of that animal. But when I have that animal on a high level of intake, the digestive tract is larger, is greater, not longer, but thicker. Same is true with the liver. If I put them on a concentrate diet of high intake, I get the same effect. Now, it's not quite as high as it is with the forage intake. Forage costs more calories to move from one end to the other, but intake level has an effect in concentrate versus forage, which is the same, again, as a lactating cow. So if you control intake in the heifer, as I get higher amounts of dry matter consumed in a heifer, the metabolic nutrient costs of digesting and moving that feed is higher, so I have less energy retained for the tissue, less growth energy. More energy is also lost as heat, and I have feed efficiency going down. So intake has a big effect on that growing animal, probably more so than it does on a lactating cow. I can't say I've seen a study to directly compare that. So going back to the early 1990s, there was some neat work that came out looking, I've just included a snippet of this for time, but a study that had, a group of steers, and they put them on a TMR type diet where they reduced dry matter intake. And so what they found in that was that feed efficiency was amazing in terms of the changes that took place, and it was because of dry matter digestibility. It had to do with rumen retention time a lot, and some of it is just overall digestibility, but a big factor of this was rumen retention time. So since the 1990s, the beef industry has used this a lot, and we're getting to start to use some of this in the dairy industry. This was a study from 2007 from Wisconsin. This one, I'll take a second. It was just a decent TMR, not a great TMR, because your feed efficiency was 12.8 to 1. So 12 kilos, almost 13 kilos of feed to get 1 kilo of heifer. Took the same diet and fed it at 90% of ad lib, because they had ad lib on the left. I won't get into the one at 80% because they were using an ionophore and it doesn't fit you, but they reduced that heifer down to 90%, and lo and behold, they could get her to grow the same average daily gain. So now feed efficiency went from 12 to 10. So the big question is, where'd the other 2 kilos go? Anybody got an answer? Pardon? Well, it went in the gutter. Yeah, okay, I think that's what you said. So it's an interesting, in this particular case, increased feed efficiency by 24%. And that's actually pretty common with these kind of things. So as I'll get into with my heifer talk tomorrow, but there are 2 ways to feed heifers as I go around the world. And this is just a classical case. We don't all put that much in front of them. But we have feed inefficient, because I'm ad-libbing her all sorts of garbage, or I have feed efficient, where she's eating her required nutrients, but she's doing it in a far smaller package. The trouble with this, for any of you who haven't tried it, it really turns heifer feeding upside down, and it really messes up your mind. So it's not an easy thing. It plays a mind game with a dairy farmer to change your feed efficiency a lot in heifers. But we have forage quality issues. I hope that you all have, is that the forages that you have in your clamps and your stored feeds and or your pastures are too good for heifers on an ad lib basis. And that is because you're trying to get them really good for your lactating cows to make them more feed efficient. But the problem is, if we limit feed by putting bedding in the diet, which is corn stover or straw, we decrease feed efficiency, because we change rate of passage and we change dry matter digestibility, and we increase maintenance energy requirements because maintenance energy is based off of kilos of feed intake a day. And so we lose double when we do that. It's just a picture of a farm that his forage quality was too good and he put corn stover in there to reduce the quality so his heifers didn't get fat. He's losing money twice. So in the last 15 or more years, we've learned a lot about feed efficiency in heifers. Basically, we limit feed our heifers. We try to feed them highly digestible diets, not bedding. And they grow about the same as long as we feed the required nutrients, and they make milk the same. We significantly improve total tract digestibility, which is only common sense. And we feed them less. They digest better, they make less manure, we don't affect the rumen. We can actually modify it and increase rumen bacterial numbers, and you know, we've done a lot on nitrogen ammonia emissions and things like that. And we can still modify the rumen if we want. You have some feed behavior change, but that's part of the mind game with the dairy farmer, not the heifer. So the kind of the one for feed efficiency in heifers is Moses didn't have 11 commandments. And find me some place in writing that says heifers need feed 24 hours a day. I've not seen that yet, but maybe you've got one over here. I can find you that for cows, though, pretty easy. And just to show you what your bedding feeding can do, this is a study where we put bedding in a diet of 18-month-old heifers. Just because we decided we wanted to let these heifers eat ad libitum. So the interesting thing is this is looking at starch digestibility. Now, starch isn't high in a heifer diet, but I still don't want to lose the starch that I have in there. I would like the heifer to get 98% of that digested. But as soon as I go ahead and put 20% bedding in that diet to dilute it out so she doesn't get fat and can eat all day long, starch digestibility goes down. So I've not only lost on maintenance, I've lost on digestibility, and starch might be an expensive part of your ration depending on what you got. You can put some other things in there, just like with a lactating cow. This was a summary of some data that was done. If I can improve the rumen environment from whatever means, I increase bacteria growth, I will have less rumen nitrogen, rumen ammonia there, because the bacteria are growing. They're producing VFAs, so they're increased. Probably the bottom two are backwards because she really, increased digestibility because I've changed the rumen environment, and therefore dry matter intake is going to be down. To end up here, if I want to improve feed efficiency in heifers, just like I do in cows, I want to optimize feed intake and not maximize it. Ad libitum feed intake and feed efficiency don't make sense. I want to increase fiber digestibility. I want to feed her good quality fiber, much like the same thing as I want to do with a lactating cow. And I want to make sure the digestibility of the diet is up there. To do it, I want to make sure my rumen function as well. I want to, a well-functioning rumen is going to be a feed-efficient rumen. And the bottom line is she's got to be healthy to get that to happen. So my conclusion for feed efficiency for a heifer is, number one, it's going to be genetic selection. We're going to have to pay a lot of attention to that, and other people are doing that for us at this point. We want to maintain optimal growth rates. We don't want that heifer growing too fast for her age and not too slow, because calories are based on body weight for maintenance, so I don't want that maintenance any higher at any given age than what I need. And forage quality has to be number one, just like it has to be with a lactating cow, and make sure the overall diet is digestible. I didn't get into this, but part of feed efficiency is not feeding too much feed for too many months. And so getting that heifer to calve at 22, 23 months is making it a feed efficient heifer. And for those of you, I don't have a number 2-4 in any of my slides for age at calving of a heifer. That's 25 years ago stuff. And quite frankly, I'll leave you with this one. If I go in your heifer barn or any heifer barn after doing research on feed efficiency in heifers for 20 years now, If I see ad libitum feed in front of your heifers, this is what I see. Now over here, I have to make the conversion into your currency, but I just see dollars lost there. Because if I can cut her feed by 15 to 20%, for any of you that can do math, what does that do to the cost of your heifers? So I'll leave you there. Thank you.